All right, guys, better late than never. Sorry that I'm a little bit of a ragamuffin, but just wanted to make sure that I got this up and posted to you guys as it's been a little bit of time. So with that being said, let's go ahead and wrap up chapter 6. Let me make sure. Okay. So we were finishing up our discussion in and around invertebrates that we can utilize in forensic entomology. So again, remember, chapter 6 is just covering all aspects of those different types of invertebrates that we can utilize in entomological investigation. And we're going to talk about things that come to the dead body, things that are leaving the dead body, and then things that just are accidentally associated with the dead body. We're going to end this chapter discussing about how invertebrates themselves can be utilized as part of a legal trade and how we can look into those different aspects of investigation as well. Very similarly to what we saw with vertebrates and sort of kind of the overview of how that chapter flowed. So we had left off talking about, let me hide this right here. There we go. Okay. So we had left off talking about, again, different invertebrates, specifically under the classification of Deuteria and of our beetles. And we had left off on the very just adorable little flush fly here. He's adorable. We love him. Don't know why it's telling me that. But with that being said, again, flesh flies, these are all different aspects of flies that are going to come throughout the stages. So in this case, flesh flies are going to come to the decaying body. They're still in a little bit of that overlap between our blowflies. So they're still within the classifications of fresh, probably within that fresh stage. And again, maybe crossing over somewhat into the stages of bloat, where again, some of our other flies we're going to look at will actually go into those later stages of not only just bloat putrefaction, but also dry active decay or remains. Okay, so we have our phorid flies. These are named multiple different classifications. Again, Megaglaciaria scalaris. So M. scalaris would be the aspect of the genus and species that we're talking about. Another name for that we could say is phorid fly. But another classification that you could be looking for on the exam is these are called scuttle flies, humpback flies, or coffin flies. And again, maybe it's a picture that I'm showing you, and you can see there's sort of arrangement here, even from the top. They have sort of this large backward portion behind their head that kind of gives them that classification. They are extremely tiny, and they can actually burrow very, very, very far down and get into areas that most other flies cannot. They tend to thrive in very unsanitary conditions, dumpsters, rotting meat, sewers, drain pipes, bathroom sinks, anything that is related to something that can have sort of that, kind of nasty, unsanitary smell. Remember those volatile compounds, everything is going to have its pheromone attractant to those compounds. This is our gentleman for the job. So they can find a lot of different things, but one of the unique characteristics that they can do is they can actually burrow in the ground up to 1 meter deep to access coffins. Because they're so tiny, they can slip into the cracks of coffins, hence their name, and they will actually go through multiple generations underground. Because they are attracted to unsanitary conditions, anything that has sort of that rotting flesh or rotting smell, wound myiasis. So again, anything as far as when we mean myiasis, we mean something that is infected, right? Something that is infected typically by an invertebrate, typically by a fly or something of that classification. Hoverflies, I'm sure that you guys are going to start to see these guys coming out. Wide variety, wide range and classification of flies that fall under this classification. But what do we see? They have an appearance of biomimicry. They are mimicking a very other unique predator, the wasp. And absolutely, we know biomimicry is used to the advantage, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're hoping they're not getting consumed by a larger predator because they have that biomimicry that looks like a wasp. So under this classification, these guys are typically going to be found in the garden. You're going to see them in their adult form. They tend to be associated with kind of that sugary sweetness and sap that comes out of flowers in the adult stage. But what we do see is things like the drone fly. So the drone fly that is under our large family of our hoverflies. These guys are very specific. And what these guys are doing is they actually are interacting with corpses. This is why we have put them into this classification, specifically during the phase of putrefaction. So again, now we're in sort of a different phasing of our entomological study of our succession, right? And the reason that our drone flies are really good at being involved with putrefaction, again, liquidy, kind of gross, things are breaking down, as the name implies, the drone fly can actually get into the putrefaction of the body because it has this very long rat-like tail extension of the larvae that provides this sort of telescopic breathing snorkeling tube. So that little tube, while the front end is sort of munching and eating and doing, right? This sort of back apparatus is providing the access to be able to still take in oxygen. So again, kind of one way in, one way out for this gentleman, or lady, I should say. But again, the idea here is this particular series of fly, different phase. So again, overlap and phasing. And then what we see is that when the drone fly is done, when these hoverflies are done, they will crawl away, very similar to what we see with the blowflies, and they will go to a drier condition to finish pupation and go through metamorphosis. Oh, this one, the cheese skipper. This is one of the most fascinating things. So the cheese skipper is associated with the later stages of decomposition. So again, as far as succession, we talk about passing genes on to the next generation. We also talk about the fact of when things are coming into kind of that ecological niche, right? So the body itself is an open landscape. And so everybody's going to have their time to come to the body, right? So by the time we get to our beetles, they're coming at very dry, active remains. They're coming at sort of the last stages. Everybody has their little stage that they're coming to the body to allow for that succession and to allow for the next generation to, to come online, to be brought on, to continue on to the next generation. A long day. So these cheese skippers are attracted to biuric acid. So this is the fermentation. It does give off a very unique smell. That smell alone can allow them to be attracted from very far and wide. These flies can particularly not only infect and invade and lay larvae and eggs on decomposing bodies, but they are notorious for causing meiosis inside of the human intestine, where the larva will go through its last half of its life cycle. They are extremely prolific in being attracted to, again, the biuritic fermentation smells that come out of things like cheeses and hams, hence their name. And very interestingly, their larvae are capable of launching themselves. So they do this kind of wiggling back and forth, almost like a flea, and they can fling themselves very, very far, again, towards food resources. So again, they are solely attracted, right, by this particular volatile compound. And those things happen to be very uniquely found in, again, these hams and cheese scents. So much so that Italians have used this to their advantage. I don't know if we want to call it an advantage, but they have flung themselves towards a particular type of cheese, a wheel of cheese. They have infested these wheels of cheese. I'm probably going to butcher the name. The Casu Marzu. This is an illegal cheese in Italy, and it is absolutely made from fermented live maggots. The cheese is presented to you exactly as this picture states, and you are cutting into it, and what you're going after is the very kind of funky smell that the process of consuming this cheese and being excreted out by these disgusting little larvae becomes a delicacy. And of course, anything that is illegal happens to carry that exotic classification to it. And so, people just go in and go for gold, apparently. But go back to point number 2, where we can see that they cause a massive amount of meiosis inside of the human intestine. Gee, I wonder why. All right, moving on to, again, still classifications of flies. We have soldier flies. One of the coolest, in the essence that they are extremely important to decomposition. Not just decomposition as far as decomposing bodies, but of course, because the body is something that does break down, it is an attractant to it. But man, they are prolifically important to the turnover of organic waste material in the environment. And in fact, they are being massively produced to do exactly that, to create soils. Their larvae are being sold to mass produce and turn over organic waste, to turn over and recycle material, physical material that is being broken down through the process of recycling. They are also being mass produced because they are such a nutrient-rich protein. Their larvae are extremely protein dense. And again, their protein profile, the reason it's so sought after is because, again, they make such a robust exterior exoskeleton, right? Look at kind of the classifications, the appearance, the arrangement of this, hence their name, right? They have this sort of very hard exterior chitinous exoskeletal shell. That takes a lot of really good healthy protein. So what we're seeing is that they're actually producing this in mass for very high protein for animal feed. All organic, just they dry and desiccate out the larva and actually feed it to livestock. So as far as our decomposition, they prefer older corpses. They are not going to compete with the blowfly, may slightly compete maybe with the forward flies, but they aren't going to compete with those that we just saw as far as our putrefaction, right? So everybody has their time and space, right? The resource is going to be fully utilized. Nature is really great like that. They can, because of their overlap in time, because of the fact that they do not come in contact with the body at the time frame that blowflies do. If we have reached the body in the absence of blowflies across the body, right? Because it's an entire environment that we have to survey, these can be utilized in the absence of that blowfly indication. Okay, so now we're going to transition away to our secondary class, which is beetles, right? We said flies and beetles are the two most valuable entomological resources that we have for forensic biology. So these are very actively scouring when the body is definitely moving into that putrefaction and that dry active remains. So the very first beetles will start to arrive. Again, they come at their succession point. And in contrast to the flies, beetles have chewing mouthparts. They have a mandible. They can kind of chew and open and close and tear and rip apart, that can get through much tougher material, starting at that semi-liquid phase, but again, absolutely when we're moving towards that dry skeletonized phase. Several beetles will make their entire living out of corpses and colonizing them. And the earlier arrivals tend to be predatory, and they will not only feed on the corpse, they also will feed on the larva of other flies. So again, this is something we have to take into consideration for PMI. Who's moving in next onto the resource can also disrupt the early colonizers. So some of these species will lay eggs in the corpse, and they will emerge as larvae, which share their parents' powerful jaws, and they then will turn around and start feeding on other fly larvae. So again, even the adult beetle and also the larva can be carnivorous and predatory on other larvae that are there that are not their own. Okay, so our first classification, our carrion beetles, again, these are kind of the two major ones we're going to look at. There are over 200 different species, but we are really going to just focus in on the two, Necrophiidae, which again, the name implies, and again, these come from the classification of Cephalopheidae. So underneath our carrion beetles, we have what are called our hide, larder, carpet, or leather beetles. These come from the classification under our carrion beetles of Dermestidae. And again, these are very much at the last stages of decay before we are a full skeleton. They are feeding on the very tough parts of the skin that have become that sort of leathery texture. Their larvae are very unique as far as things that can digest keratin. They can actually break down keratin. They have very powerful gastric chamber that can actually break this protein down. These are a little bit unique because they are cannibalistic on their own larvae, so it's a battle of who gets to the top. And again, the reason that they are so prolific and very good at their succession is because, again, they have this sort of chamber inside this periatrophic midgut that is inside of the larvae. And what it does is it is actually lined with a very specific subset of cells that allows for, these very kind of nasty, hard to digest things really become broken down, rolled around inside of this periatrophic membrane, separated from very protective epithelial cells. And there's this extra lining, this periatrophic membrane inside of this sort of chamber. And what it does is it literally coats, after the beetle is broken down, all the nutrients that it's received, I should say the larva, it then excretes out and sheds that entire periatrophic membrane into what we call frass. And it is entirely just a full encasement where we can then tap into for DNA collection. So again, maybe we haven't fully digested keratin and we can actually still see some hairs, DNA, right? Any aspects of this. And these will stay around for quite some time. So we can retrieve these after the beetle is gone. I have put in some very cool videos for you. I love showing you guys these in class, but these are awesome. So these are flesh-eating beetles that come through, and they are utilized in museums of natural history to preserve species. Really awesome, like super, super cool. And fun fact, the beetles that we see in this video that is explained, they are offspring from the very first beetles that were brought into the Natural History Museum decades and decades and decades ago. So they're the progeny of that, which is really, really cool. So check this video out. Really awesome, just to kind of show you how really amazing these guys are at eating away just the decaying material and leaving very delicate structures behind. Okay, burying beetles. These are nature's undertakers. They are absolutely one of the best, really, as the name implies, undertakers. They're very good at burying decaying remains of anything, animals, humans, etc., for their later food resource, but also to help break down and as a later food storage to tap into. And so again, that once it gets under the soil, we have fungus, we have bacteria, we have all these things that are coming to help aid in the breakdown, and they're all pulling out all that beautiful recycling of nutrients back into the soil. Some burying beetles will actually not bury at all any of the dry remains. What they will actually do is they will simply fight to the death to use as a breeding ground to lay their eggs, right? It is a resource. It is a food resource. So after the female lays eggs, she will bury them in her hindgut secretions to prevent fungi and mold growth. And again, then they will go ahead and just, encase them to make sure that they have a safe protection during during the developmental stage, right? So nothing else is getting to them. What a beautiful thing nature has done, right? It has said, okay, we're going to use this as a resource, but I also know this resource is going to attract other things that could harm my larvae. So I'm going to actually, create an enzyme through evolution and protect it. So again, both adult and larvae will also consume blowfly maggots. So again, something we need to consider as far as PMI. Also have a very cool video here. These guys are movers and shakers. And they are so good at breaking things apart. They can really move body parts pretty quickly. In that stage of decay, if we have not discovered the body as of yet. So again, giving that appearance of dismemberment. All right, mites. So again, I found this recent research paper, and I thought this did a really nice job of kind of summarizing some of the aspects of mites associated with forensic entomology. So again, mites themselves really, as most things are, affected by pH. So again, if cadavers are buried in shallow graves, this will cause a change in soil pH. And again, that temperature above or below can also be affected by the cadaver in the shallow grave. And what we see is that mites will colonize and rapidly increase in abundance between fresh and dry decay. So over really the entire stage, and also again, depending on where it is buried. So again, buried a little bit underneath, or at least some aspects, because really the mites are in the soil. Temperature, humidity, rain, everything that's associated with things that we have to think about with forensic entomology, no matter what. These really have no significant impact on mite abundance in shallow graves, because again, if I'm buried underneath, I'm sort of protected from those elements. Last but not least, pH. pH is a major environmental factor impacting mite abundance. If it's too alkaline, too acidic, right? Everything is, responding to, again, overall aspects of its environment, not just temperature, but also pH. So earthworms, I love getting to this one because this is one that is often a misnomer for a lot of students. Worms are, really popularly associated with dead bodies in many folk songs. I don't know if you guys have ever heard the Hearst song. This was something, I feel like when I was a kid, we heard this song or in some way, shape, or form. But in the Hearst song, right, it says, the worms crawl in and the worms crawl out. The worms play pinochle with yourself. They eat your eyes. They eat your nose. They eat the jelly between your toes. Worms don't do that. Worms are if mites are sensitive to pH, worms are even more sensitive to pH because worms are incredibly vital to making soil. They are our soil makers. And so they really do not go around anything that is too acidic, right? Because they themselves are an acid machine that is taking in and ingesting things to basically poop out soil for us. That's their job. So again, as they're taking in soil and dead decaying material, again, that is the right pH and right balance. It is going through all these different aspects of these different enzymes and enzymatic processes. I'm not expecting you to know this. I just thought it was really fascinating because again, by the time they're pooping that out, really what they're pooping out is all the beautiful, gorgeous, wonderful elements of nutrient recycling that go back in the soil. So while they're eating the soil in, they're just loading the soil back up. So again, earthworms, they are our buddies, absolutely vital. Any of you who've ever tried to take your hand at composting, number one thing they tell you, you got to get a good, healthy earthworm population because that's what's really going to make the good soil for you. So epigenic species, those living on the soil, may enter buildings. So their presence may be found, with a corpse, but it's purely accidental. And again, they decay very, very quickly because they're a soft-bodied material thing. So it's really hard to kind of justify their PMI. They also accumulate heavy metals, but it is not known if they accumulate other things from dead bodies or also heavy metals from dead bodies. So again, lots of research still to be done. Okay, what about other insects? Ants and wasps. Again, in tropical countries, ants can be the most abundant of invertebrates found on a dead body, and they will occur at all stages. Ants are pretty robust. They are found just like earthworms in pretty much every environment on planet Earth. Many of the ant species we see are very predatory. They may slow or speed up the establishment of things like our blowflies as they will remove the eggs and the young larvae, because if you're too close to my nest, you're out of here, right? I don't even care that you're on your food source and I don't want that food source. You're just too close to me. I'm going to kick you out, or I'm going to, eat you, so to speak. Wasps are carnivorous, and the adults will prey on other invertebrates for the most part, and very large wasp nests may therefore impact surrounding invertebrate populations. And this is something we need to take into consideration. If there's a large wasp nest that is preying on flies and blowflies or any of the things we've just discussed, they may not even get access to the body. Or there might not be enough in an abundance of numbers. So again, this is something we also have to look into. Last but not least, the parasitoid insects. These are insects that lay their eggs within the bodies of other invertebrates, typically other insects. While they won't infect the bodies they feed on, they infect the larva of the insects feeding on the body itself. Thus, again, a very large population of insects falling under this classification can absolutely affect the reproductive cycles, which could affect the PMI, right? Which could enhance or slow down. I have also included this very cool video. I show this in biology too. It's called The Body Invaders. So there are lots of parasitoid things on planet Earth, not just insects. There are wasps that do this, but really the most prolific and ones that you probably, there was a whole show that was made on this, I think it was called Last of Us, is fungus. Fungus is really good at being a parasitoid. And what it does is fungus is exclusively evolving to specific species of invertebrates that it will infect and cause the creature, the insect, to do very wonky behavior on behalf of, its growing fungal spores. Very cool little video, it's a little bit squeamish, not for the faint of heart, but very cool. And again, I'm not going to test you on it. It's just something I thought is pretty awesome. Okay, so those are all invertebrates that will be associated with coming to a body, right? As the body is decaying, as the body is going through those stages of decay. But there are invertebrates that will leave dead bodies. And what do I mean by that? I mean those that need the source to be alive, right? So again, anything that's a parasite, fleas and lice, those need a living host. So again, these are going to be things that would, if we came to the body or we came into contact with a large population of them without a body, it could be an indication that a body was once there, right? So again, the sight of them crawling on a person's head or clothing could indicate that death did not occur too long ago. And again, we also can look at this in cases of forensic conditions where we are possibly, or I should say, if we are looking at cases of neglect and abuse. Seeing large numbers of these on someone may indicate, again, unsanitary conditions or neglect. The fact that these ectoparasites could also act as vectors of disease also needs to be carefully considered when working with dead bodies. They are a host for things that can infect you, right? You can be bit by a flea, you can be bit by lice, and theoretically you can get, an infection from them. You can get, diseases, you can get certain aspects of that. So when the uh, the forensic entomologist is coming to scene, or if we have anybody coming out to do the detective work to collect evidence, we do need to be considerate of the fact that, again, we need the appropriate material and protective gear so that we aren't being infected by whatever the body's exposed to. Okay, so this kind of just up till now kind of shows you, I thought this was kind of a nice stopping point just to, I put this also in chapter 7, but again, here are the different waves of succession and when things are coming to. So very first succession wave is going to be blowflies. We've talked extensively about that. After that, we tend to see that it moves towards, flesh flies, our beetles, maybe other flies and beetles, mites, beetles, right? And again, it's aligned with the different stages of the corpse. So what about those that may be accidentally associated with dead bodies? Not everything wants to play with dead bodies, even though it is a robust resource. We already said earthworms could accidentally be associated with it. They don't like the change in the pH at all. But again, after the body is fully decomposed and it's just skeleton, they may be attracted to all the nutrients that have now just been dispersed into the soil because of that, right? So we might still see a prolific amount of them, but it probably is going to be long after there would be a quote unquote, body, and it's the traditional form of what we're thinking of finding. So sometimes insects are trapped and become a part of the decay process, but are not associated with, and these need to be absolutely, taken into consideration because they are not analyzed as an indicator of PMI. What they can do, though, for us is they can provide evidence of a person's association to a location at time of death if they have a very unique geography. Things hitch rides all the time. If I was in a different country or if I was somewhere else, right? They may be not wanting to be associated with the dead body, but they may have hitched a ride on clothing, shoes, hair, etc. They are associated with very specific habitats, urban environment versus rural, or we can see, niches across cities or aspects related to, I guess, urban and rural is the biggest ones I'm sort of thinking of. But yeah, specific habitats, forest versus lakeside versus, countryside. Or they are only active at very specific times of year. Again, these are all things that can help us to identify just aspects of where maybe a person was. So again, question that could be maybe, how could invertebrates that are accidentally associated with dead bodies, while not indicative of PMI, what could they be helpful for, right? They could tell us again, due to the restriction of their geography, due to potentially having very specific habitats or being active at only specific times of year. So as we saw in chapter 7, or I should say chapter 8, sometimes invertebrates are the cause of death. Very few insects have venom, associated with them being the cause of death, but some can sting and cause anaphylactic shock, right? They can cause asphyxiation due to anaphylactic shock. And again, allergens, maybe they're not stinging, maybe it's the allergens that's presented in their feces or in their exoskeleton as they're shedding. This can cause very severe allergic reactions, but also can lead into potentially anaphylactic shock. I don't know about you, but if I had a giant wasp in my car, right, you're gonna be freaking out. So again, sometimes these things just can cause pure distraction. You get spooked by something, people have fallen off cliffs because they've seen a giant spider or a centipede or a scorpion. Accidents happen, right? And again, they can lead to panic. We can also use invertebrates as a forensic indicator of, again, cases of neglect or animal overall welfare. So we already know that they can cause wound myiasis in us. They can absolutely cause wound myiasis in other animals. So again, wound myiasis is the terminology that we refer to as being a parasitic infection, things like maggots and blowflies, flesh flies. And again, as these things become more infected, they attract more flies because they emit more volatile compounds as those things are consuming and eating on that sort of rotting flesh. This can lead to things like septicemia, which is an infection of the blood with bacteria, because some of these things are also vectors, and this can cause, again, distress, pain, and can potentially be fatal, not only to us, human animal, but also to other animals. It can absolutely happen to anybody old and young, ill, if they're incapacitated, bedridden, and again, can be absolutely utilized as an indicator of neglect. Soiled clothing in unsanitary conditions are also things that can attract further different flies and things of that nature. And as we mentioned, fleas, mites can be an indicator of neglect and abuse. Just as we saw with vertebrates, we can also need to take into consideration invertebrates in food spoilage and hygienic litigation. And again, we are not immune to this. We have been evolving alongside of and consuming invertebrates for protein for a very long time as we've been evolving. It's been a food resource. Um, you know, when we were evolving, we didn't have the term organic. We just pulled things off the ground or out of the ground and whatever was on it, we ate it, right? But as we evolved and we became more civilized and put into place Food and Drug Administration and higher sanitary practices, we've evolved out, right, the backup mechanisms inside of our genes to be able to really be protective against a lot of the things we were probably be ingesting or being exposed to in, early Homo sapien, Homo erectus is kind of pathway of evolution. So as we've gotten better at removing pests and bacteria and, anything that can be a potential, unsanitary condition that can get us sick, we've lowered our tolerance to this. And now we can get very sick, right? Hence the reason why we need, to make sure we're checking for this. Also, they can transfer things like bacteria, pathogens, viruses, and protozoa. And most importantly, really, when it comes to invertebrates, again, where we will be looking at things like the feces for our vertebrates, we're going to be looking at sort of the ground up protein structure of their exoskeletons or that chitin, their hard exterior. We've already mentioned, again, that blowflies can be involved with some things, but again, blowflies, anything really flies, anything that's fresh meat is going to attract it. So, realistically, you leave the hamburger meat out too long, you leave, right, we automate, what do we see? The flies are coming right away. And yeah, what are the flies doing? They're not only eating, but sometimes, right, they are looking to have a food source for their larvae. right? Flies will often regurgitate and defecate where they eat. So that is a lovely extra added spice to those hamburgers and hot dogs. And many pathogens will pass through flies' guts unharmed and therefore can be passed on to us. Meat that is left exposed will quickly become infested with blowfly eggs. And again, just like the life cycle we see in corpses, these will absolutely follow the same suit. Very highly studied. This can be very helpful in determining legal cases of foodstuffs. All right, the last bit of our chapter, we do have invertebrates that are illegally traded, right? There's a large classification of things on planet Earth that are invertebrates, right? So some are considered delicacies, lobsters, oysters, crabs. This leads to very high demands, high prices, and illegal fishing. Coming back to our game warden conversation. Fraud is a major issue alone. So the abalone shell that we see over here to the right, this is a delicacy. It is a very high prized meal. And again, the shell is also prized. This was, I think, the price in US dollars for one of these, I think about 7 or 8 years ago. So I'm sure it's even higher now. And many species are illegally traded, and unfortunately, habitat loss and destruction simply is just going to drive up the cost higher because they're becoming more and more endangered. Like the mole cricket. If you've never seen a mole cricket, now you have, and it is a very confused little invertebrate. He just doesn't know what he wants to be, but he deserves to be that little mole cricket. So that's it, guys. That finishes up chapter 6. You now have everything that you need for exam 2 or exam 3, I should say. And that will be Wednesday, April 3rd. And come prepared, Scantron, pencils, all that good stuff. And we will be ready to go. I will be posting an announcement for you guys to make sure to remember to come to lab on Monday. Have a good weekend.